Welcome everyone, lovely to see you all. We have 3 days of really fantastic sessions for you to enjoy, scheduled for mornings and afternoons because we want to be working really well for our friends in the East and friends in the West. And I get the pleasure and the privilege of starting us off with a little plenary. So I'm going to do a little intro to what what Holocon is all about, and then we'll do a bit of Q&A around that, and then there's probably a little bit of technical briefing. And this year we're really going to try and get our mingles right. Mingles are a fantastic idea, but last year they didn't work as well as we hoped they'd work. So we're going to put some effort into practicing mingles and getting our mingling right. Developing our mingling skills. So I'm gonna start, if that's okay. So I've got some slides here. I usually avoid political stuff, but given the circumstances, it's really rather hard to do. And I want to frame this as it's almost like an age-old story, actually. You could, without wishing to trivialize it, there is a comparison to the old story, the hero's journey, something like Star Wars, in fact, where the innocent, the naive, authentic leader goes up against the ruler. And this is it really is a conflict of the ages. In that sense, the sort of good versus evil, the innocent voices of the masses versus the isolated ruler. And I wanted to put that into the Holos context that we use when we talk about leadership. So you've got the authentic leaders who lead from a sense of purpose and are primarily motivated by purpose, and create sustained success by enabling all of those around them to be the best version of themselves as much of the time as possible. And at the same time, by being the best version of themselves, by really working on their leadership and their leadership skill. And ranged against that, in this age-old narrative, you've got the ruler, the Emperor Palpatine or Putin. And the ruler is operating primarily from a motivation of status. So it's that their status is the thing that's important to them. And they are, through their actions and their decisions, they impoverish the future. They're very, very difficult to work for because of the kind of loyalty that they demand. And they're very powerful. And one of the other aspects that you see about them is that they both try to recruit the authentic leader, but they're also completely dismissive of the authentic leader, or certainly of the authenticity of that leader. And we've seen in the last few weeks that all of this playing out in the Ukraine, and it's that there are very significant consequences for leadership depending on how this plays out and who wins. And I'll come on to how Holos. Why Holos exists and what Holocon is all about in a moment. But we are very committed to spreading authentic leadership and increasing authentic leadership, and encouraging it and valuing it and understanding just how precious it is. And I hope that that's one of the threads that we can have throughout Holocon this year. Just to go into it in a bit more detail, in this ruler versus authentic narrative, rulers will create short-term success, but only by stealing from the future. So you can look at the short-term success that Russia has been enjoying over the last few years, both economically and politically. But all of it is by stealing from the future, whether it's stealing from the climate or stealing from the rest of the world politically. It's all done by stealing from the future. Whereas the authentic leader creates sustained success by enabling people to be their best. And you can see that with Zelensky enabling his people, the Ukrainian people, to be the best version of themselves. Ruler-style leaders don't recognize authentic leadership as leadership at all. All they see is weakness. They don't recognize it as leadership. It doesn't look like leadership to them. They actually cannot see it as leadership. It's invisible to them. Whereas authentic leaders recognize the leadership potential in everyone. Ruler-style leaders are primarily motivated by status. Authentic style leaders are primarily motivated by purpose and the context that they're operating in. Ruler-style leaders have to be in control. And again, you can see that with the draconian laws being imposed in Russia in terms of media and news stories, whereas authentic leaders like to empower and delegate. Ruler-style leaders are not able to show vulnerability. It's almost like an illness to them. Whereas authentic style leaders are much more likely to debate their hopes and fears and be vulnerable, share what they're really about. Ruler style leaders prioritize loyalty over competence. And think of the implications that has for the competence of their armed forces, the competence of their politicians. If you're always going to prioritize loyalty over competence, it's going to be very hard to get the best people working for you. Whereas authentic style leaders prioritize character over competence. Ruler style leaders have low self-awareness and poor emotional regulation, whereas authentic style leaders have high self-awareness and work on their emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is not easy for anyone, but authentic style leaders will work on their emotional regulation. And ruler style leaders genuinely believe that they are special, that it's their right. That is how the world works. Whereas authentic style leaders are much more humble. They work strongly at their leadership and at their authenticity. And if you've ever worked for anyone you considered to be a great leader or an inspiring leader, it's highly likely that they were an authentic leader. I hope all of that makes sense, and I hope it all puts it into some sort of perspective. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I think there are some, as ever, there are some leadership lessons in all of this. So I'd like to move on from that and talk a little bit about what we're here for. So this is Holocon. It's the 5th edition. It hasn't quite been annual, so I think there's probably 5 over 6 years. Just pop in if you've been to more than one of these. Just pop into chat how many you've been to. I would love to see who's been here for several. We started off running these sessions in a fantastic loft in South London, which you can see in those pictures at the top left. And then our final face-to-face was at the Saddlemakers Hall in London, which was a wonderful event. I'm sure quite a few people were there. We've got, I'm looking in chat at the moment, we've got people who've been to 3, we've got a few people who've been to all. Rob has been to all of them. That's fantastic, Rob, thank you. Angela's been to 4. And quite a few who come to their 2nd and their 3rd. Fantastic, thank you. Really lovely to see you, see new people and also people who've been here before. Last year we had our first virtual one, of course, and what we found was, of course, it is wonderful meeting people face to face and being face to face with people, but there is something magical also about being able to be global and have global speakers and global participants. And it's lovely today that we've got Akiko here from Hokkaido, and Doreen from Singapore, and Tessa is in South Africa. And this afternoon, we'll be joined by our American friends and colleagues. And so I suspect that Holocon will continue to be virtual. It may go hybrid at some point, but we will always want to keep it so that we can have people from around the world joining us here. Just a little bit about Holos itself. I think we're kind of the sponsor, the main sponsor of Holocon. We love to do it. It's our main sort of connection event during the year. So we love to bring the community together and have more people join the community. We have a vision for universal authentic leadership. We believe that the world will be a better place when all leadership is authentic. And I've explained a little bit about what I mean by that earlier on. I'll probably go on to explain it a little bit more later on. Our purpose is to enable sustained success for our clients, for us as a faculty, and for humanity as a whole. And I'll go on to explain more about what I mean by sustained success a little bit later on. And our mission, our strategy for growth, what we're doing is we're deploying our faculty on large-scale transformation projects. We're deploying digital tools to support cultural transformation. We're training and recruiting new faculty because part of our own, it turns out, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it turns out that we're getting older, and we have to recruit new young faculty in order to be sustainably successful ourselves. So that's a really important part of what we're doing. We want to move beyond the corporate sector. Our background, our history, our experience is very much in the corporate sector, but we would love to move into education and the public sector, and that's part of the theme for Holocon this year. We want to expand Holocon in our more ambitious, grandiose moments. We think of Holocon as being another TED, only more interactive. And we also want to expand the Great Leadership Project. I feel a bit guilty that we haven't really done enough with the Great Leadership Project. But the idea of the Great Leadership Project is that there's evidence, there's good evidence that people in the wider world don't really understand leadership. If they did, they would never elect some of the people that they do elect into government. So the Great Leadership Project is really about celebrating great leadership in order to help more people understand what great leadership looks like, so that we get better at choosing the right leaders in business, in education, in government, in the public sector. Because it's very easy for authentic leaders to get overlooked, because if you're a boss style leader or a ruler style leader, you don't recognize it as leadership at all. It doesn't look like leadership. So here's our plan. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but our plan is to over the next 10 years really, to really grow to grow Holos into an organization that really makes a very big difference to leadership globally. And we don't do it on our own. We do it only through collaboration. Everything we do is through interdependence and collaboration. But we're serious about where we're going. Here are the clients we're working with at the moment. And I'm very proud of the work that we do with these companies. The work we do with Q8, for example, formerly a fuels retail business in Northwest Europe, rapidly transitioning to a vision for universal authentic leadership. But also doing transformational work with companies like Santander and Specsavers and Astellas, and increasingly doing transformational work with City and Guilds, and amazing work with AstraZeneca, with hundreds of leaders around the world. So really, really amazing work. Neutrinos is a startup in India, very proud to be working with organizations in India, and very keen to develop the work that we do in India and around the world. Weir is an engineering company based in Glasgow, another global client, and really looking forward to extending our work with them and doing more transformational work there. We have an amazing faculty. This is just a few of us. There's about 130 of us in total, but these are some of the folks who we see most often, who we work with most frequently. Again, just tremendously proud of the capability and skill that we have, and looking forward to expanding the faculty and reaching more people around the world. So this is the theme of the conference: sustained success. And I just have a read of this. It's an approach to life and business and organizations and society, which systematically prepares for the future while effectively managing the present. So it's about both creating the change and being effective at the present as well. For individuals, it involves a degree of discipline around our health, well-being, and personal development, and rigor in our day-to-day activities. And we've got some fantastic sessions around this. Matt and Tim are running a session on personal resilience, for example. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it really starts with us as individuals. How do we ensure our own personal sustained success, economically, in terms of well-being, spiritually? How do we look after our own sustained success? If we can't be sustainably successful as individuals, we can't create sustained success for others. For businesses and organizations, it's about creating a culture where everyone understands the context, aligns around the cause, and creates the conditions for operational excellence and strategic brilliance. For society, it's about education that prepares the next generation for a future we don't understand, whilst also maximizing the creativity and energy of adults to reduce the challenges for the next generation to face. And when we first came up with the expression sustained success, I was a bit underwhelmed by it, because I thought, surely that's what everyone is after. Surely that's what everyone is doing. Surely that's the norm. But increasingly, as we've worked and met more people and so on, you realize that actually most people, a lot of people, are working for really quite short-term success. Some of that is to do with their circumstances. You know, if you're in a highly stressed situation, if you're facing a crisis, it's really hard to think long-term about the future. But what we see with a lot of our clients is that they're so busy, they're just busy, that they're so busy that they are unable to think strategically. It's not that they're incapable of thinking strategically, but they're so overwhelmed with the day-to-day that they don't have the time to think strategically. And of course, if you're not actively planning for the future, if you're not actively thinking about the future, you're highly likely to be surprised by it. That it's almost inevitable. And so actually one of the key leadership skills that we've got to develop and that we teach is the need to create bandwidth, the absolute leadership responsibility to create bandwidth in order that you can think about the future, that you can be strategic. And this goes for us individually, personally, in our personal lives, as well as in our business lives or our working lives. And so in order to create sustained success, we've got to do these things. And one of the other things that we notice is that in many organizations, busyness is actually related to status. So if you ask people how they are, the answer that they'll give is busy, because busy makes them feel important. If I'm busy, then I must be doing something right. That must be good. But of course, of course, they make themselves busy in order to fulfill that. And the consequence, again, is that they're unable to be strategic. It's very difficult. There are very few organizations where it's okay to sit around thinking, where it's okay to just have a chat without an agenda, where it's okay to go for a walk and think about things. Maybe during the pandemic, some people have been able to do more of that because they've felt less observed. But creating that kind of culture where sustained success is what we're trying to achieve, where bandwidth is something that's appreciated and respected rather than being dismissed. And so that's really a lot of what we're talking about over these 3 days of Holocon. So let me share with you a little bit of what is going on. I know many people have booked sessions, and some sessions are already full, which is awesome. But if you haven't booked your sessions on Swapcard, this is part of what you have to do. Well, you don't have to do. You can just jump in and out of sessions if you want to. But it's really useful if you're able to book yourself into sessions. So let's just talk a little bit about the sessions that are happening. So as I mentioned earlier, Matt and Tim, who I think it was this year or last year, published a book called Recharge. They're running a session all about resilience and how we can have the energy, how we can have the personal energy to enable sustained success for ourselves, whilst also coping with all that the world has to throw at us. That session's already full, but everything's recorded, so you can binge watch Holocon in the evenings after the sessions, and I think it's going to be available for the next 6 months. So you've got plenty of time to catch up on sessions that you miss. Steve Hall is building on the same kind of themes. So he's going to be talking about ways that we can sustain human performance and avoid draining it as a key thing about sustained performance. And this is roughly chronological, this list, very roughly, but I've split it out by themes. So this set of sessions are for individuals. My dear friends, Susan and Richard are going to be running a session on about blind spots and how we can expand our networks to broaden our perspectives. And I heard a thing on the radio last night, I think, about how powerful kindness is, and how powerful it is being kind, how powerful being kind is for us as well as for others. This is partly about inclusion and diversity, but it's also about kindness and how we can enable ourselves and others to flourish simply by being kind and thoughtful and inclusive and caring. Angela, who's already here today, I can see, is going to talk about psychological safety. Psychological safety is a big theme in the conference today, over the week, and the effect of creating a psychologically safe climate around ourselves and around others to enable creativity and collaboration and human flourishing. Again, it costs us energy to work in environments that are not psychologically safe, where we feel undermined, where we don't feel safe, where we don't feel like we can be ourselves. And of course, being ourselves is also about being authentic. So psychological safety is critical to authenticity for many of us. So Angela will be running a lovely session around that. Emma, who's here already, I notice, is running a session about connected leadership and how social media can make us better leaders. I'm always fascinated by what Emma has to say. I have to confess I don't always understand it when she's, all of the intricacies of social media. But it's really important to listen to her and try to understand it and build our reach, and how we can use these amazing tools to connect in positive ways. There's an enormous amount of negativity about social media, but that's to do with how people use it. We don't have to use it that way. It can be incredibly powerful and positive, and Emma can teach us about that. So thank you, Emma. My esteemed, wonderful co-founder, Mark Thompson, and longtime Holos agent, Phil, will be running a session about post-conventional facilitation, FPF as it's known, future-proof facilitation. And we ran a pilot program in at the end of last year. Some of its alumni are here today, I've already seen. The feedback on that session was amazing. That course was amazing. And if you want to develop your facilitation skills, almost whatever level you're starting at, so whether you're an experienced facilitator or a fairly inexperienced facilitator, the Future-Proof Facilitation course is an amazing way to develop your facilitation. So they're going to run a session about that, talking about what the course is about and how it works. And if you're interested in that, I highly recommend going along there. Oh, look, I'm part of a session here. So this is about the psychology and physiology of sustained success, which is a topic that I'm fascinated about. I've been a keen cyclist for about 30 years now, and I'm astonished that I'm still learning. I'm still learning. I feel like a newcomer every year as I learn more and more stuff about it. And we've got this extraordinary privilege of having Leon Taylor join us. He is an Olympic medalist as a diver, and we're going to have a conversation really about this area of how you maintain performance under pressure, because we can all be brilliant when things are going well. The crucial bit is, how do you do it when things are difficult? And what's the physiology and the psychology of that? So, what happens to our bodies under stress? What does our mind do to our bodies when we're stressed that might inhibit performance? And how do we take care of ourselves in order to maximize our potential performance? I'm really looking forward to that conversation myself. Roddy Miller, who I think is here now, he runs a publication which is all about leadership, a sort of, I'm not exactly sure, I think it's a kind of a magazine kind of thing, but online. And he's going to talk about the importance of followership in relation to leadership. And we at Holos are huge fans of the power and influence of followership. So I think that's going to be a fascinating session as well. We talk about the dynamic or the dynamic agility of shifting between the skills of leadership, management, and followership. And I think you're going to talk about some of that and how influential followers can be. Followership is not about obedience and doing what you're told. Followership is a highly influential role, really, really important. So this is very loosely, these are the sessions that are about that are aimed at individuals, as us personally, and sustained success for us as individuals. Equally loosely, we've got quite a lot of sessions that are really talking about organizations and organizational success and sustained success for organizations. So we've got Scott Chambers, who's coming to talk to us. He's got a partnership with the Fearless organization, and he's going to be really diving into psychological safety and how vital that is for sustained success for teams and leaders. So another session on that, just brilliant, really interested in that. My dear friend, Mark Curtis, is coming here to share a talk that he did, or sort of reprise somewhat, a talk that he did at COP26. He's the head of innovation and thought leadership at Accenture, and he's talking about the relationship between consumers and sustainability and how we make sustainability accessible to consumers. And I'm very fond of saying that sustainability isn't a choice, it's inevitable. Anything that is not sustainable won't be sustained. And the consequences of not being sustained are quite serious. It means ending. Whether you're an individual or a business or a country or a species, if we're not sustainable, we stop being sustained. So thinking about how we make sustainability accessible, and sustainability as a practice is very much something I would like to develop for Holos as well. I think it's something we should be teaching to our clients. So I think Mark's session is going to be fascinating to understand how Accenture are thinking about this and what they're doing about it. Yesa, who's a sort of a magician with facilitation, is going to be delving into the Holos philosophy and how that works, and always highly interactive sessions. But he's going to be talking about how Holos engages with sustained success for our clients in this disrupted world that we're working in. Dr. Julie Compton, one of our faculty, she's going to be thinking about newly promoted leaders and how can they hit the ground running? What are the ways that they can be thinking about it to be effective from the beginning? So, you know, we're all here as leadership professionals, whether it's from the inside of organizations or as practitioners, and again, really useful session thinking about that transition moment, really important moment for leaders in how to be effective as they start. Lee Sankey, who's an innovation consultant, will be taking it up a level and talking about what business philosophy. It's really interesting. We talk about the idea of conventional and post-conventional organizations. And in a conventional organization, really all you're trying to do is be really, really good at what you do, focusing on reliability. And of course, in an organization like that, philosophy doesn't sound particularly important. But if you're being disruptive, if you're a post-conventional organization, if you're trying to change things and be transformational, then having a philosophy becomes much, much more important. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what Lee has to say about that. Nick Stratton-Jones, why leaders suck and what to do about it. Maybe this, I don't know exactly what Nick's going to be talking about, but really thinking about the upgrade that leadership needs in many organizations. And maybe it's related to this, you know, this reality that an awful lot of leadership comes from a status-based place, like a boss-style leadership, rather than from a purpose-based place. And I think that would be fascinating to hear what Nick has to say. He's an amazing teacher with an incredible track record of transformation. So it'd be really interesting to hear what Nick has to say. Andy's session, we can see how many people have booked into sessions. Andy's session is proving to be tremendously popular already. And a question we often get asked, you know, how does a small group of people create transformation? I think it was Margaret Mead who said, don't ever believe that a small group of people, committed people, can't change the world, for it is all that ever has. So really interesting to think about how can a small group of people, not necessarily at the top of the organization, influence a whole system. And maybe that's related to Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point and that sort of thing. You know, you don't necessarily need to have everyone on board to create a transformation if you're aligned. Hamish and Sarah, fascinating story. So they created a startup from scratch in the pandemic, entirely virtually, half of them have still not met each other. And then the business that they're doing is an amazing business. So I think of it as turning chimneys upside down. They're taking factory chimneys, polluting chimneys, and they're turning them upside down to pump the CO2 underground permanently, safely. And if you think about the consequences of that, the implications of that, we cannot create sustainability without doing that. That's part of what we have to do. And they're doing it. And it's a fantastic story of how they're doing it. So if you're not signed up to that session already, I strongly recommend you take a look at it and have a go at that one. Now, David is fascinating too. So David teaches ethics and ethical decision making to the military. And one of the things that I think is that, you know, the evidence of our society is that in spite of all of the millennia of practice, we are not very good at making decisions. All of the stuff, all of the negativity that we see around us, all of the damage that we see around us in the world is the consequence of human decisions. So the evidence is that we're not very good at it. And so learning how to take decisions, how to be really good at taking decisions, I think is an absolutely critical skill. It's one that we already teach, but I'm sure that we can all get better at it. And so having a masterclass from David to help us understand really good decision making, both how we can do it for ourselves and how we can teach it, I think is really important. And then we've got Gabor, who most of what we're going to be talking about is cultural stuff and leadership stuff. Gabor is really helping us to think strategically about what the future should look like. So, you know, once you've created that bandwidth, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use that time to create strategies that can help transform your business? So again, another highly recommended session. And finally, some young people. So really, really happy to have some young people. This session sounds fantastic. So the title is wonderful: Young Leaders, Entitled Lazy Job Hoppers, or a Ticket to Sustained Organizational Success. So I love that. And Rosie and Ria are absolutely brilliant. And I think there's a real concern that older people actually are a bit almost prejudiced against young people. My experience of younger people in their teens and 20s is that they are absolutely amazing. And I'm absolutely horrified at that they know so much more than I did at that age. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like I knew nothing in my 20s and 30s possibly. And I'm just so blown away by how much young people know these days. In cycling, there's some people who call them new humans because they're just so much better than previous generations. So we have a lot to learn from these new humans. And I really encourage us to go and do that. And also, you know, we're able to empower them, us older generations. So I really encourage us to find ways to create space and opportunity for these younger generations because they're amazing. Oscar is going to be talking about purpose and the importance of asking that why question and how we can integrate purpose into the way that we do business. So really important cultural dynamic. Gordon, who I think is freshly back from the Ukrainian border, where he's been helping refugees get across the border. So he's come back to do his day job all of a sudden, and he's going to be talking about, well, in fact, talk to him about that as well. Don't let him get away with just talking about the day job. But he's got an amazing way of measuring human metrics in teams and measuring team performance. And, you know, teams are the unit of productivity and performance in organizations. So measuring how they perform is really, really valuable. And we got my dear friend Henry coming. Henry founded a company, I don't know how long ago, but it's such an enlightened organization called Happy. And they teach computer skills. That's the day job, but actually what they role model, what they're really about is at creating a happy organization. And he's been experimenting with happiness in the workplace for decades and has just got some amazing wisdom about it. And why not? You know, why wouldn't a happy workplace be a more productive workplace? Why wouldn't creating happiness be an objective, not just for organizations, but for societies? I mean, I don't know if people are familiar with the Happiness Project and what is it? I can't remember. Gross domestic happiness, countries that measure happiness. But there's a lot to be said for it, and I again highly recommend that. Very fortunate to have Craig Fenton here, who's COO for Google in the UK, and he's going to be talking about how they do it. How they do leadership, this post-conventional leadership that leads to sustained success in a post-conventional world. So it's going to be really interesting to hear about how it's done from the inside of Google. Fiona is always got a different perspective on things, and her study and her wisdom into the psychology of leadership is amazing. She's got a PhD in authentic leadership, so she's the one we really should be listening to. But this talk is about how our hormonal profiles influence our leadership styles and personality. So again, I go back to that point about, you know, we're all good at being fantastic leaders when we're at our best, but what about when our hormones trip us up? And we become a lesser version of ourselves, and how do we have that self-awareness and that emotional regulation to keep ourselves as the best version of ourselves? So again, really important session from Fiona. We've got 3 stages. I know you're going to have to clone yourselves to attend all of these, or at least watch the videos. It's probably easier than cloning yourselves. So Rachel is going to be talking to us about the power of thinking environments. And again, you know, we talk about busyness and the challenges of busyness and the importance of bandwidth. You know, once you've created that bandwidth, how do you make real use of that time to think constructively and powerfully about what you're doing and what you want to do next? How do you not waste that bandwidth that you maybe create? So those are the sessions that are mostly about organizational dynamics and organizational situations. And then finally, we've got a fantastic set of sessions for society. So I love the fact that we've got a French philosopher coming. I don't think he calls himself a philosopher, but he definitely is when you talk to him. Thomas, who's recently written a book called The Politics of Being. And he's really talking about shifting that priority from doing to being, from having to being. And how can we create wellness and well-being and joy in our lives from a sense of being, and bringing that into our personal lives, but also bringing it into politics, again, maybe related to gross domestic happiness and that sort of philosophy as well. My dear friend Arena, she's also started a business virtually during the pandemic. They are providing electric vehicle charging to vehicle fleets in Chicago area in the US, and she's going to be talking about how they've very intentionally set up the organization with culture at the heart of it. So really intentional about culture from the very beginning, and seeing culture as the route to performance in a post-conventional organization. Rhianne Marie Thomas is the chief exec of the Green Finance Institute, which is a body partly funded by the government and partly funded by the City of London, and they are basically seeking to transform the financial institutions of the City of London to a sustainable focus and investing in sustainability, putting all of that money in the city to sustainable use. And she's going to talk about how we can all contribute to sustained success in our ecosystem through the personal and business decisions we make. None of our businesses can be sustainably successful if our society can't be sustainably successful. and our society can't be sustainably successful if our ecosystem isn't sustainably successful. So we've got to be thinking about it at all of these levels, not just at 1 or 2 levels. Akiko is going to be taking me to task, thinking about culture, and it's really, I think her take on this is so fantastic, because it's really about the subtleties of cultural tension that can be created inadvertently. In fact, with the best with the best will, the risks that we run of creating cultural tensions without realizing it. So I think that's going to be a fantastic session as well. And then all fantastically privileged to have Amelia coming. She's got an amazing title here. So she's the Executive DEI Lead Advisor and UN Global Compact Target Gender Equality Implementation Partner. So, and she's going to be talking about the diversity narrative in the UN. So how is the UN really helping build diversity? And not just, I mean, gender equality, but also thinking broadly about it for a global purpose. How do we get, and of course, this is about getting everyone to be the best version of themselves. We can't be the best version of ourselves if we feel like we're discriminated against, if we feel like we're not being included. Of course we can't. So in order to create a sustainable society, we've got to have everyone being the best version of themselves. And Amelia is going to be talking about how the UN approaches that, which is so important. Christina is working on the ground to do this stuff. So she runs the Seed community, and She Evolves, and they invest in young African female entrepreneurs and the stories that they're going to tell about these young entrepreneurs changing lives and really contributing. When you enable people who are traditionally disempowered to step up and to be empowered, the amazing things that happen. And Christina is going to share some of the stories of these, what happens when you do that, which is going to be fantastic. Maria is here, and again, we're super privileged to have Maria here today. She's talking about a similar kind of thing in a way. Maria also has an amazing title. Maybe that's something to do with the UN. Maybe they give people amazing titles. I want one of these titles. So Maria is chair of the Eva Ahlstrom Foundation, and she's also chair of the UNICEF International Council. And she's absolutely passionate about how investment in education is just the best investment that we can possibly make. How the long tail value and benefits of investing in education for society, for organizations, and really just how we can contribute to that, and how what they're doing and the success stories that they're having. So again, an amazing session that we should be part of. Now, I'm not quite sure what's happening with Tim. I know that he was a bit challenged. I think someone else will be running this session for him, but just Tim runs an amazing organization as well. Know You More is an organization that provides mentors to young people, which is just a wonderful thing to do. And if any coaches here have capacity and interest to be mentors to young people, get in touch with Tim, go to his talk, find out about Know You More, and join in with that organization. Then we've got Muna Abbas, who is the country director for Plan International in Jordan. And again, I think this is a challenge that we've seen firsthand in some of the work that we've done with some of our clients. But how do you go about practicing feminist leadership in a patriarchal society? And it's just going to be fascinating to hear that from Muna. Really, really interesting, really important. And I think that this is female leadership, feminine leadership is so important. If you look around the world at the best leadership that's going on in the world today, a very large proportion of it is feminine leadership. So there's an enormous amount to learn from feminine leadership, and I would absolutely, for men to learn feminine leadership is as crucial as for women to step into their power and be really strong leaders as well. So I'm really into that. Lewis is, if you've ever come across the amazing guy who swims at the North Pole and swims high up on Mount Everest, that's Lewis. And he does it all to raise awareness of climate change and our need to take care of the climate and take care of our ecosystem. So again, an amazing session thinking about all of those things. So that's a sort of whistle stop of what Holocon is going to be all about. I know that's been a bit of a sort of download and a bit of a blur, but I'd love to hear from people. If you've got any questions or thoughts or challenges to any of that, stick your hand up, and we've got a few minutes we can talk about that. And we're going to blend into the mingle straight after, so we can afford to overrun a little bit, if that works.
That was a really wonderful introduction, Neil. This is my very first time on here. I've obviously heard you speak before, but I can't remember many speakers covering quite such a wide variety of topics in such a small period of time, and yet make the whole thing seem together and link together as though it was intentional, which was very wonderful indeed.
Thank you, James. Well, that's all credit down to the amazing Holos team who've pulled together this program, and hopefully it is coherent and it does all tie together. Well,
it did. And to embarrass you further, of course, all great leaders never accept a compliment when they're given it and they hand it straight across. So leading by example from the start, I'm delighted. But recognition where recognition's due. That was a wonderful opening.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Steve says he's cancelling his Netflix subscription for the next 6 months. Love that. Thank you, Steve.